I'm just
Yeah.
going to go ahead and start and say, Eugene Hubbs, thanks for coming on and hanging out with me. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you about music, just because you were such a pivotal influence in my youth and coming to music, and you kind of redirected a lot of my attention and exposed me to a lot of concepts that were really rejuvenating and just it's definitely shifted my entire perspective on music. So I'm really grateful to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. That's cool to hear.
Yeah, man. Um, cool. Eugene, I'd love for you to tell me what are some of the things that really have your attention right now? What has got your focus?
So creatively, I would definitely say, so like I'm kind of in the middle of like recording some stuff and writing and recording a couple of pieces of music. But I've really been like, what's really had my attention for the past couple of weeks has been sort of, I don't know, the constant musician's existential crisis of what am I saying and why am I saying this and why am I doing this and what is my purpose and am I just making a bunch of pretty notes or am I trying to say something and am I saying it well or
Right.
not? Will people understand it? And
Yeah.
I've been really immersed in a ton of different music. I spend like a lot of the time. I probably spend like maybe 4 or 5 hours every day listening to music, just like really like deeply listening to things and just trying to like hear their message and see like if I like am I speaking the same language or sometimes just trying to learn the same language. But I've been totally obsessed with John Coltrane this past week in particular. Just like just really kind of getting into reading some biographies and a lot of his interviews and just really like understanding his philosophy and approach to music and stuff. And of course, I mean, his music is just incredible. It just completely blows my mind. But
Is there a recording in particular that's been really compelling?
oh God, I have a huge playlist that I kind of go through. But I for me, for the longest time, my favorite things was definitely my favorite one of his. But I definitely went through probably a year and a half where I literally like just had that song on repeat and that was it. Like all I listened to.
Yeah, yeah.
But and I mean, and it's still like every single time I heard it, like I would hear new things. But I think like the past couple of like this past week, for sure, my favorite things that I've been listening to a lot, but really like I've just really been caught up in the two albums, Love Supreme and Meditations. Just really like trying to like channel the ideas and the concepts that he was channeling from that and just really like just being like that in tune to his spirituality and to just sort of this just connecting to this beautiful idea, this beautiful light that he felt that humans should all be connected to, and just really just beautiful intentions behind it. And just really to the untrained ear and to those who aren't familiar with a lot of it, like if you just picked up those albums and you listen to it, it's not something you'd listen to while you're trying to do your homework or you want something in the background or something. Like it's very avant-garde, very esoteric. And if you don't have somewhat of an understanding, when you first hear it, like it sounds like a bunch of just noise and it just sounds probably awful. And it sounds almost sacrilegious to say that it's a psalm to God and stuff. But,
Hmm.
and it's just, for me, it's just a huge challenge. It took me probably 2 years of listening to the Love Supreme until I finally actually started to understand what I
Yeah,
was hearing.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's a difficult. Those his late stuff is some difficult stuff to get.
I mean, like I can kind of relate. I mean, to be honest, I haven't spent a whole lot of time listening to Coltrane as a featured artist. I've definitely heard him as a primary artist, but I've heard him as a featured artist on a lot of different people's recordings. But like what that kind of instantly makes me think of is like, to be honest, like reggae was actually something that I had a really hard time connecting to. And it took me several years of like, I actually played in a Bob Marley tribute, you know, and it took me 2, 3 years before I really felt like I was starting to understand like the rhythmic implications of that music. It was actually really challenging for me to pick up how like, oh wow, like I've been playing this music for years and I finally feel like I'm starting to play reggae.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
and some of it you have to be really patient with the listening experience because the vocabulary has like so much context behind it
Mm-hmm.
that it takes a little while to understand the prerequisites.
Yep.
um,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something that that's probably something that really drew me to Coltrane in the first place, is just how complex it was and
mhm,
just how much was going on. And it was
mhm.
just sort of, I'm always up for a challenge like that. Like when it comes to music, I'm always up for the challenge, but like probably anything else in life, no, not at all. But music, sure. Like I'll take that on for sure. But, I mean, but for me, like, I was 12 years old when I first heard Stravinsky's Rite of Spring.
Wow.
When I like actually listened to it with a pair of headphones and not didn't have Fantasia on, but actually was like listening to like the real orchestral score.
Yeah.
And like I was 12, 13, I think. And I remember just like for the very first time, like the world stopped and I was just like, this is it. Like for me, like that was the moment. Listening to that was like, there was so much going on and there was just the complexity and just all I didn't understand a single note that I heard, but I knew that there was just this whole universe that was just like happening in front of me. And I was like, at that moment when I heard that, I was like, I want to be a composer. I want to be working in music. I want to be making music because whatever's happening, I want this. This is it for me. And like, like my very first like thing that really inspired me was like Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. So naturally,
Yeah.
Coltrane is a is a natural progression. But
I'm curious, is that like, was that the music, like the caliber of music, the complexity of music that you were exposed to earlier than that? Or was that kind of like a phenomenon that you stumbled across through Disney or like,
yeah, so for me, like I grew up kind of like my musical like I've always been around music, I guess. Like my dad was a musician. My dad had a band for when I was a little kid. Some of my first memories are sitting with my dad while he's playing guitar and singing, or like sitting on my mom's lap at some bar and watching them play some gig. He played bass, but he also played guitar and he wrote songs and he was pretty into they were good. I mean, I've heard some of they've got like a couple of little recordings and stuff, but they never really were able to make it very big. The record company folded that signed them right after they got signed. And then he just got so discouraged that he just kind of quit music, but he always kind of played. And then he got to a point where he stopped playing, but right around the same time, he became really heavily involved in the church. And the particular denomination that I grew up in was the Church of Christ. And they don't use instruments in their worship. It's all a cappella.
okay.
And so for me, and like I'm not sure if you're familiar with shape notes, with shape note notation, but it's
Okay, yeah, I've seen some of that.
yeah, so like the Church of Christ uses that, and like the whole hymnal. If you go to the church, like they're like you open up their hymn book, it's all shape notes, and so like you see like the music, but it's all in these funny little picture picture notes. But I learned originally how to read shape notes, and like really like it's very heavily the music and the hymn songs that are traditional to that particular denomination are really like trenched in like Appalachian. Hymn song, folk music, and it's non-denomination. So like, there's no liturgy, there's no nothing to it. So it's like services like you met every Sunday and Wednesday, but would probably go for like 3 or 4 hours, but there was no set liturgy. It was just everybody came together and sang for hours together and no instruments, just a cappella. And so you learn how to harmonize and and we're American, and Americans have always had a really interesting approach to harmony. As like we've started to assimilate all these different cultures and into our own musical cultures, we start to really, American harmony is just super rich. And so like we really, I grew up like in youth groups when we would just like sing for hours together, like all sorts of teenagers coming together and singing, and like we're just harmonizing and making stuff up, doing like different singing, like writing different tunes to be sung at the same time as the traditional hymn songs, because we didn't like singing the old hymn songs. We wanted to sing something else. So, you know, we would just have, to me, hearing like 16 parts around me was normal. And, you know, I was just always around singing and always, especially really deeply entrenched in harmony and making it sound cool, which is what a lot of my friends, like we would like sit around and like we would like harmonize and stuff, but we would purposely sing the wrong notes, or we'd sing a different note, not knowing that of course we were creating jazz harmonies and stuff, but we were just like, it sounded cool to us.
Right.
But like when I was 13, we moved to Memphis, Tennessee, and the school system in Memphis is a magnet school system. And we just happened to move into the district where the performing arts school was. And so so my middle school, from 7th to 10th grade, I was in the performing arts school. And so like, I was in band, you know, we had like band 2 hours a day. I mean, like even beginner band. I mean, like we were always like, I mean, I was taking private lessons. All my friends were in music, and being in the performing art school, and like I played French horn. And so like I was really, really very much entrenched into that classical tradition. But I had also had the church music and the harmony on Sundays. And my dad started picking up guitar again, and he was starting to write a lot of folk songs. And I had also, the year before I joined band, we moved too late for me to join band. So but I really wanted to do music. But one of my friends, his little sister, she was in 4th grade. She just finished 4th grade, and they had finished their music portion of their education. And so she had her recorder left over. And before, we were living in Arkansas, and our school system was way too poor. So I couldn't, but we just didn't have music classes in elementary school. So I never got music in elementary. But my friend's sister had her recorder left over. And so, and she was just like, I don't want it here. So she just gave it to me, and her little method book, like the first like 6 or 7 pages were missing, and it was like all like torn up and stuff. And it was like, and I remember looking at it and I'm like, this is dumb. Like the note heads were like teddy bear faces and stuff. And I'm like, okay.
Okay.
But I was like totally enthralled with the recorder. I was like, this is really cool. So, you know, I kind of played around on it and like plucked out on the notes and kind of figured out what to do. And the library where my parents were in school, in grad school at the time. And I would, because they didn't want to leave me home a lot by myself, because I was the only child, I they'd take me to campus, and I would hang out at the library, and I'd always just go to the music section. And I found like they had tons of old books. It was kind of a depressing library. They didn't really have much new stuff. Everything was super old. But I found like reprints of like old translated Italian Renaissance like music books and stuff. And there were a couple of recorder books, because recorder was like the main instrument in the Renaissance era. And so like I checked some of those out and kind of taught myself how to play recorder. And so that was like, I prepped myself before I started playing horn by playing recorder, and learned kind of playing harmony and stuff. And my dad, you know, would always hear it. And like recorder is a very common Appalachian folk instrument. It's very common in Appalachian folk music. And especially the kind of stuff my dad was writing. And he knew of some artists, and he knew a lot of recordings and stuff that had like a recorder, and he was starting to write music. And so he was like, hey, why don't you play with me? And so he taught me how to read. He couldn't read music, but he reads lead sheets.
Okay.
So he taught me how to read lead sheets and how to improvise over lead sheets. So
Very cool.
You know, so like that was basically my childhood. Like it was me doing music in one of those capacities um, or reading Lord of the Rings or Wheel of Time. And like, that's basically all I did, like, as a teenager until I graduated high school. But yeah.
Can you recall any of the references to like the Appalachian music that uses the recorder? Like, are there any artists that you can think of that are a good example of that? I'd be really,
Oh,
really
let
interested
me
to hear it.
see. Oh God, yeah. There's not a lot of like specific artists that do that, like that specifically do that kind of music anymore. It's just it's not many people record it anymore. It's kind of a lost art form now. It's really sad. Like if you go to Asheville, North Carolina, you'd probably hear some stuff, but like other than that, you probably won't hear much. But like there's some, um, there's a couple of James Taylor songs that have some recorder on it. Um, Led Zeppelin used recorder a couple times.
Yeah.
But I know there's like there's a Jim Croce song my dad used to play all the time. Yeah, I have to think about it. I can.
Yeah, I'd really appreciate a reference. I mean, I've been starting to play more and more bluegrass recently. I mean, it's
Yeah.
within the Hood River community, it's a pretty prominent experience. A lot. I mean, there's a lot of deadheads that kind of came out here and decided to retire here and pick up the guitar or the mandolin, and so um, a lot, and so it's interesting because there's a fair amount of like interest within folk music that has settled here, and like there's a lot of folks are kind of retracing their heritage through folk music. So I have a couple of students that are focused on music from Wales and music from, or music from Scotland and whatnot, and kind of going back to that. And it's amazing how, I mean, it's amazing how like sophisticated some of those arrangements are. I mean, a lot of them are written for four parts. It's like four-part harmony arranged around a melody, and so like at the point that you kind of talk about the Church of Christ, I'm kind of curious when you talk about the shape notes and the a cappella experience. There was a lot of that like SATB as well. Were you working with like were the hymnals in four parts or like?
So
Um,
yeah, so the hymnals were written in four parts, and it was just the straight up normal 4-part harmony. Like it would look like any other hymn song,
right,
except that the note heads would be in a different shape. It
right.
would be like the do is a triangle, and like sol is like a circle, and
So it's based upon solfege. Is that where the shape notation comes in?
yep, that's the whole thing. So like it's and it's basically movable do, but it's like it's kind of the it's sort of where like reading like music notation and solfege kind of combine. It's a happy medium between the two. If you know solfege and you can recognize and you can associate those notes. I mean, it's just like the Kodaly like technique when they use the hands for the
Yeah,
stuff. It's exactly that same technique, but instead of using your hands, you're just changing the note head into that shape.
yeah.
Um,
I was studying "All Fly Away, Oh Glory," and so like there's like it's a classic tune that was used in like "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" by Alison Krauss and Gillian Welch, right? And like you go back to the standard notation of that, and it has that shape notation. And to be honest, that was the first time that I really kind of encountered it within my own studies. I mean, within some historical aspects, I've seen it before, but not really like on my own trajectory of like looking for music had I stumbled across it. So it's
yeah.
really cool that we had the opportunity to talk about that a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and that song actually originates from that whole tradition. That's an indigenous song from like the whole shape note singing trend.
Hmm.
But like yeah, we did SATB, sure. Um I mean at very very bare minimum we would have 4 parts. I mean printed on the page would be 4 parts, but a lot of times by the time I was growing up, a lot of the hymnals, and we would have like these big supplementary books that didn't have any music with them. It was just lyrics.
Hmm.
And everybody just kind of knew the tune and everybody could harmonize. So it's like, well, and like a lot of times we tended to prefer those instead of the books that had the harmony written down and that was set, because then we could change the harmony, we could do more things with it.
Right.
And like yeah, but we were also really infamous for having part songs. I'm not really sure what we would call them, but I would call them part songs. So it's like every single part, usually there's 4, sometimes 5 or 6, but most of the time it's 4, and every voice would have its own completely different tune. And then like you just layer it off, and so you start off with like the sopranos, and then you add the altos and they sing their thing while the sopranos keep repeating, and then the tenors add their little song while the sopranos and altos are going, and the basses come in. And then you just have like this whole thing where all 4 parts are singing their own song together, but it all works together.
Mm-hmm.
And then people start after a while, like depending on if the situation's appropriate or not, then like if we keep it on for a while, then people would improvise, or little group things would kind of come out and stuff. And
Kind of sounds like a combination between like a round and a fugue.
something like that. Yeah. Like, yeah. Yeah.
That's really cool, right? I
I
mean,
mean,
it's
I could sing you some examples, I guess, but like,
I
it's
mean,
like,
it's just interesting to me that you had like that's a pretty well-rounded experience growing up in the sense that you had like opportunities where you were learning to sight read and like read music off the page, but also like where it was really encouraged for you to be improvising based upon your sonic experience, your oral experience through your ears. That is like such a holistic part of music, and I feel like a lot of people either grow up in one camp or the other. So like how cool that you got both right out of the gate.
yeah. And for me too, like while I was at the performing arts school in Memphis, but that school is a public school, and it's located like right in the middle of the city. And Memphis is not known for being a gentle city.
Right.
it's a rough, it's a rough place, especially if you're in the city proper. It's not very white, and it's very rough. And but at the time, like this was the early 90s. We moved to Memphis in 1990. My 7th grade year, my very first couple of weeks in middle school was when the Rodney King and the LA riots happened. And so that was like, and before that I was living in like very, very extremely rural Arkansas. And then moving from there into Memphis, and then like within a couple of weeks, having like all of this stuff happening was crazy. But at the same time, musically, so like right now I'm in graduate school, and I was TAing for one of the music professors at Oregon State. I was TAing the survey of hip hop. And so like we're talking about like the history and development of hip hop. And like for me it was really fun because I like as like the focus of the class was mostly for like 80s and 90s. And so for me, like that's totally my childhood. So I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this, and like and like a lot of stuff like, oh, that's what was going on, or like, oh, this was like it's really interesting. But like the late 80s, early 90s, musically, something was just going on there. Like I know it's famous for old people. Every old generation says that their music was better and that the music around today is crap. And like I remember hearing that growing up too. But like as a professional musician, as somebody who's like, spent a lot of time and stuff, I have to say, like the music that we had back then was much better than a lot of the stuff that we have today. I think like there was something going on in the late 80s, early 90s, just musically. There was just this exploration. And I think that really hip hop really pushed those boundaries, and that influence just leaked out into everything.
It
And
did.
like, I mean, just like, and for me, like being in the city in Memphis, like during that time, especially with like the race relations and like musically what was going on, and like most of the people in my school were Black, and so like a lot of them, and it was a Grammy, it was associated with the Grammys, our school. So like we had people like that would come by. Like I remember Quincy Jones came to our school once. I remember
Wow.
like Boys to Men, just before they really started, like they were on their tour, like trying, like just before they released like their new stuff, like I think their stuff had just got released on the radio. Just like maybe a couple weeks before, and someone was their cousin. Someone was a cousin to like one of them, or to like one of their producers or something. Somebody at school was related to somebody to Boys to Men, and they came and sang at like one of our functions and stuff. And like, you know, like, and we would like summer stuff. I mean, we would have like a bunch of stuff. I mean, we were a really good school, and there was a lot of talent that came out of that school, and a lot of people were really focused on that. But there was so much. I remember walking down the hallway, and there always being groups of people just like literally like they making those circles and having their spit off, and like they like people are like beatboxing, or they're using the lockers to like make their beat, and then like there'd be like 3 or 4 people like standing around, and they would just start rhyming back and forth to each other, and like that would be lunchtime. Like, you know, I mean, every table there'd be like all these different things, and like people would just be banging on the table, beatboxing. I remember everybody used to get in trouble for that. Was the teacher's biggest complaint, was students constantly beatboxing and the other students trying to spit a rhyme out.
Hmm.
But just like, I mean, so like have like being actively participating in all the stuff that I was, while being like adjacent to all of that happening at the same time too, is like really um totally just like a really unique musical experience for me.
Yeah, I mean, there again, it's just like a really well-rounded experience because at the point that you're getting exposed to modern pop music from another culture that is like beginning to permeate like all of pop music and like all the fronts of pop music. I mean, today country music, I mean, everything has like, even jazz has like hints of hip hop in it,
Yeah,
or maybe even more than hints of it. It did completely like rewrite what was considered like feasible within each genre. um, so
well, like
I'm
I think it broke down the boundaries of what white America was allowing for to happen in music.
okay. Yeah.
I think like it was finally, because I think that those things had always been there, especially with like hip hop. Um, when I was in college, I had talked with this amazing artist, Nina Fralon. She's an incredible jazz vocalist. Um, it's unfortunate that not many people know of her, but she is just absolutely incredible. About 10 years ago, she did this amazing project with Billie Holiday. Um, but I mean, she's got a lot of stuff out on Spotify, but Nina Fralon, everybody should go check that out for sure. But I like had several really great conversations with her, and she had talked about um, how like hip hop, she said that the thing that bothered, because like at the time, like this was 2004, I think 2003, 2004, and so like there was still like a really big debate on you know, they're trying to make laws to make hip hop illegal and stuff. I mean, especially with like Newt Gingrich like wanting to like spending so much time in Congress like up complaining about hip hop and stuff. And she was like, you know, people like him make me sick because like they're the ones that sit here and talk about like all the failings of hip hop and everything, but they're the ones that made hip hop. You know, they like they took away the music programs, so they took away all the art programs, they took away all of these things from primarily from the inner city schools. And like they don't have anybody teaching them how to sing, they don't have anybody teaching them music forms, they don't have them teaching them how to play an instrument. So of course like what kind of music do you think they're going to make if you're not teaching them? But like hip hop makes so much sense because it's words and beats, and no matter what you take away, you can take everything away, but beats and words are intrinsic, and there's no way you can take that away. And like hip hop is one of the most beautiful expressions of music because it's everything it's the most organic thing possible. It's when everything has been taken away from you and you're actively being told no to everything, beats and words come out anyway. And it's just,
Yeah.
you know, and it's just like, you know, those things are always there and they've always been used. And, you know, hip hop is just a result of not allowing people to use anything else
Mm.
except a bunch of old records and some broken turntables and some beats and words. I mean, and that's,
Right.
we're
Yeah.
still going to make some music and we're going to change the world with it.
Yeah, it certainly happened. I mean, that's exactly what happened. It did change the world. Um, I'm kind of curious on your perspective of like what it is that happened to music over the past 30 years. Because I would agree that like there's music has definitely shifted. I mean, it always does. It's like an ever changing um, art form, but like at the point that like the music that is like getting most of the attention from the masses or from the people in power, the things that are being promoted to be listened to, has like almost become monochromatic. And it seems as though like that there are a number of issues with that. But I'd really like to hear about how you think music has degraded over the past 30 years.
I think part of that is how we consume music and how we encounter music. But like a lot of the reason why like the type of music, I mean, it's a business, it's a market, it will
Yep.
fill what the market wants. And
Yep.
so like this is what people are engaging with. This is what people have, this is what people are buying. This is what people are listening to. I mean, maybe because that's all they know, but it's partly because, I mean, this is what happens when we stop teaching music in schools. And this is what happens when I think like music was very, to sound like an old person, which is really weird because I'm only 42, but it still sounds like, I feel like I'm like older, but I talk like this. But back when I was a kid, we like I think music like in the 80s and the early 90s, early to mid 90s, like music was just really like you listen to it and like even even the alternative rock, the grunge bands and everything. I mean, you listen to like Nirvana, and like the chord progressions that are going on there are just insane. And it's like, okay, but like that's what happens when you get to like go to school and have a functioning music program that's teaching you the music that's around you now. But like by the time I was a kid, we were learning that same music, but it wasn't it wasn't relevant to us anymore. You know, I was learning a bunch of old music. I was learning music that was very popular in the 60s, like in band. Like we were playing like all the great parts of the like wind ensemble repertoire, but like you look at the copyright date and it's like 1950, 1960, 1970, and the harmonies were super cool and everything, but that was like cutting edge in 1960. But it's like I can like turn on He-Man and like hear an even more like metal chord progression than any of this like amazing stuff that you're like pushing down my throat in music theory. But it's just like, you know, music evolved, but what we were teaching didn't. And I think like especially during my time, like we were really focused. Music was all the arts like really had to like that's really when it started, where they had to defend themselves for like their very existence. And like lots of I fortunately finished high school before all of the big just before all the big cuts to the arts started rolling around across the country. But like we didn't really learn things that were relevant, which is why people felt it was okay to cut it. Like nobody, like, I mean, the most relevant, cool, cutting edge thing that we had in high school or like during the 90s was jazz band. And we're playing like big band standards from the 40s and 50s. And it's like in 1990, nobody cares. Like it's not that cool. But like there was so much other music going around, but we weren't really allowed to make that music in band. We weren't allowed to sing pop songs in choir. We weren't allowed to bring guitars into the band room. We like there were plenty of rock bands and stuff, but not a single one of them ever even thought about coming to the band director and asking for music advice. You know, like there was just never the music that we taught was irrelevant. And so we were kind of left on our own and we weren't taught how to develop. And so we didn't appreciate it very much. And so then when we don't learn about it, we don't know about it. And we gravitate towards what we know. I think the music today, and especially in the past 20 years, when I listen to it, I mean, on one hand, as a music teacher, it's kind of a gift from God because it's like, oh, I could just pull any pop song off the radio and pull it in class and just be like, okay, let's do some like basic dictation. Like, let's talk about like, let's do some ear training. Like what chord progression do you hear? And I don't have to worry about throwing out some complicated bomb that's going to like stump me. Like, I mean, I could pull any pop song off the radio and it's going to be the same progression that I pulled from yesterday or the day before. I mean, like, we lost the complexity of understanding the depths of music, I think. That was a long, rambling answer.
No, it's great. There's a piece in there that I want to expound upon a
Yeah.
little. Um, like I think that it's an interesting balance at the point that like I think that it's really important for people that are just getting into music to find understanding and what's relevant to them immediately.
Hmm.
But I think there's also a balance in going back to the tradition, you know. And so like at the point that you talk about like being interested in music, that was like when was the Rite of Spring composed? You know, it's like you know
1913.
yeah, yeah. So it's like here you're talking about like 70 years of difference, you know, it's just like a massive amount of time that's like between what's like compelling to you and what's currently compelling to you, what's currently happening in the world. And so like if you were to like give some suggestions to the music education system that we have, like how would you balance that? How would you be able to incorporate like what is present and also the importance of like how we got to where we're at?
Mm. So it's funny that you asked that because that's actually my thesis. That's so like my current. So what I'm doing in graduate school is I'm focused on. So I'm doing an interdisciplinary major. So I've got three different programs that I'm combining together. But my primary focus is looking at the music education system and how we can like update it and make it more relevant. I'm primarily focused on college level music, um, just because I, yeah, I just that's more of my passion, and I also feel like the secondary education, the entire system as a whole, should be completely dismantled. So, like, I feel like if I were to like offer any suggestions for how to like fix like a high school music program or something, it would be completely irrelevant because I think the entire way that we do high school should be totally eradicated and redone anyway. So, moot point. But and like overall in general, I would say like so primarily so my thesis is I'm actually looking at um, dismantling white supremacy within music education, and specifically I'm looking at how to address the anti-blackness that's in the American music education, which it sounds kind of like one of those like my dad kind of rolled his eyes and like a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, like like, oh, you're one of those people. But it's like when you start to see, like when you start to realize, like it's sick how deeply entrenched white supremacy is in music, especially in our American system. And just like I mean, it's white supremacist for sure. It's very misogynist. I mean, the very first like something that a lot of people don't know is so in the 1940s, when America was still kind of forming their college systems and coming up with, I mean, women weren't quite allowed in colleges yet. I mean, I mean, let alone the country being segregated, women still weren't allowed to come into colleges, or if they were, they weren't allowed in some classes, or maybe they could in a few. But the American Musicological Society, who is the number one, um, they're our main sort of organization today that sort of dictates where music sort of as a formal academic formalized study and area is. They're sort of the ones that have always kind of been the controlling organization of it. And when they first started, um, so there is we know the composer Seeger, but his wife, Ruth Crawford Singer, she made quite a big study in folk music and studying folk music, but she was quite a really great legitimate composer before, but she never could get any of her stuff played because she was a woman and nobody really wanted to hear women play stuff. And she was one of the best students in the school, but she was never allowed to actually sit in the school in the classroom. She was allowed to sit outside the door, and sometimes the professors would leave her a chair, but most of the time they would just close the door, and so then she'd have to go and do some kind of self-study. Well, they promised her that she could sit in on the formation meeting of the Musicological Society, because originally every state had its own chapter, but they decided to incorporate and become the larger organization, which would then sort of govern academically where colleges would go, and then from there colleges could start having music programs, and they would have like the music curriculum, and sort of they were basically meeting to dictate how we teach and just do music in our country.
Hmm.
And so they were like, yes, you should come. They told her the wrong time, told her an hour later, closed the door and locked it. So when she came, she was left outside. She could kind of hear a little bit of it. But in the meetings, the very first thing that they did, the president stands up and he says, all right, gentlemen, please look around. Notice there are no women in this room. This is intentional. Music cannot be seen as a woman's study field. Music needs to be seen as legitimate. And so like our meeting today, our focus today is how do we make music look legitimate? And so like that meant keeping women out, because a lot of the other arts and the humanities were becoming overrun with women students, and they didn't want that to happen to music. Music should be protected. So women weren't really allowed, and they decided what the canon was going to be, what composers they're going to talk about, what theory they would talk about, what techniques, what pedagogy we would be using. All of that stuff was decided, and it was intentionally decided because they didn't want it to be considered a woman's field. So it was completely masculated and completely defeminized from whatever their definition of that would be. And that's the start of our formal American music education. And everything builds off from there.
Wow.
But like, I mean, in terms of like the anti-Blackness, every single American music form, every type of music that's like specifically like American that happened, that's like natively I don't want to say native or indigenous, because I don't want to conflate that with like native or indigenous peoples, but like that which happened organically within America from Americans. Every single bit of music that can be classified that way as American happened in the Black communities first. And it was a way for the Black communities to express their oppression. And then the white people heard it, thought it was great. A few of the white people who had connections to the Black community got in, played around with them. There's some integration there. And then the white people take it, perform it for the white people, totally appropriate it, change it over, and now it's marketable and people like it until the next time. And then it gets old, and so then they're looking for something new. And every single form of music that is specifically American started in the Black community, but we don't give any credit to any of that at all. We talk about, like when we talk about jazz, we talk about Gershwin. We like Gershwin is okay because he was a white man. And so sure, we can have Porgy and Bess played at the Met because, he's a white man, and that's okay. But like Scott Joplin wrote some incredible operas. Scott Joplin was like an amazing classically trained pianist. He wasn't allowed to play in Carnegie Hall, even though he was better than all the people they were but he wasn't allowed to play because they didn't allow Black people in the building.
Right.
So he wrote some incredible operas, amazing stuff, incredible. Just what he was doing with harmony was just like beyond what anybody else was doing. But it still has yet to like really be like performed or really be brought out, because I mean, it's Black people, and like we don't care about Black people in this country. So unless a white person does it and a white person does something. I mean, I'm sure if a white DJ found the music and then did a remix of it, suddenly it would probably be really popular. But I mean, and that's jaded, I know, but like, I think to answer your question of what would I suggest in the education system, I think it's make the music education, what we're learning, relevant to what's around us. And that like, I think that really comes down to a deeper definition of what is music and what does music mean to us as a culture and as a society, and like why do music in the first place. And I think we're so locked up in this curriculum of having to do these things, and like whenever, I mean, I found when I talk music, anybody that I know that's not a musician and that's not really like a serious musician, they don't even want to talk music with me because they're afraid. It's not like I'm like speaking in some language that I'm going to make them like, or anything. Like they won't even initiate a conversation in music with me because they feel like I relate to music in a different way. Because the music that I've learned, the music that I've studied, the music that I've like supposedly entrenched myself in isn't their music. It's not, it's something, it's a totally foreign concept to them. And like, they don't even know how to talk about it. And like, for me, like I started noticing, um, like a lot of my friends won't even talk music with me. And it's like, well, part of the reason is I don't talk music with them. So of course they don't know how to talk it with me, but it's like, you know, but like, how do we, like, where is that common ground? Because I find like musicians, when we talk about music differently. But when I'm with people who aren't musicians, I completely am like, I'm talking about things in a totally different way. And I'm talking about completely different things. Um, but teaching the music that's relevant and helping the listener understand how anything that you hear can be relevant, and understanding like, and trying to look for that relevant, that personal relevance to you in any type of music. I think that's a skill that we don't learn.
Mm.
And I think that's really the basis of where any music education should come from. So yeah, that's my very long answer to
Cool.
your question.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Um, I want, let's see here. You had mentioned like talking about music differently with people that aren't like in like aren't academic or experienced within the art form itself. Um, like, and then talking about it differently with people that have experience playing it and performing it. I want to like talk about those two different camps for a minute
Yeah.
and why, because I imagine that like music is important to those two different camps for different reasons. So like before we get into the performers, let's talk about the masses and the people like the music appreciators or maybe people that like experience music but don't necessarily like entrench themselves in it. Why is music something that is valuable to humans?
Yeah. Um, I think like, I mean, music is just something that's kind of intrinsic. I mean, it's really like we make music before we talk. I mean, as babies, we sing, and like we, you know, we may not consciously, or maybe we are, who knows? Like, like, you know, but we're making melodies, we're doing things like we make music first before we start speaking. And we recognize music first, and we encounter and we can relate to music first, before we can with speaking. I mean, you can play, I mean, that's why we sing our kids to sleep instead of talking them to sleep, because like
Right.
they understand that feeling.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and I think like music is just something that's just such a natural human expression. But I think, I mean, for me, the past couple of years, I've really been deeply into sound. And really, I've been getting into sound art, and, you know, in addition to music, and sort of trying to like find a way to bring those two together. But just my whole fascination with sound, um, there's a piece I did for an art installation a couple years ago. It's called God is Sound. And it's like everything is really sound. I mean, it's like every creation account that we have, any myth, anything, whatever, everything, the very first thing that was created is sound. I mean, it doesn't, nothing actually explicitly says sound was the first thing, but it describes a thing. Like there's the Icelandic myth of like the giant egg, and then it cracks open, and then out comes the bird, and then there's like, and then that's where the planet goes. But the very first thing that happens is the crack, you know, or like God says, you know, in Genesis, you know, sure, there was all this stuff, but the very first thing that happened was God spoke. First there was sound, and then there was light. And like, and it was because, and God chose to use sound to create things. He
Right.
didn't like, you know, he could have just thought things. I mean, but like we're taught that he said, he spoke, he made sound, and so from sound things happen. But even like the Big Bang theory, even if
Right.
you like, I mean, bang is a sound, and
Right.
so like that event created sound. And so like to me, like um music is just sound that has meaning. And like that's how I would basically describe music, is sound that we've decided to give some kind of meaning to. And you know, because of that, I also don't believe that there's such a thing as noise, because noise just means sound that you don't want to hear, sound that you want to ignore. And I don't feel that any sound should be ignored. I think it's there for a reason. And so like, but you know, from that perspective, encountering sound, and that all music is just sound with meaning. Well, what meaning am I doing? I mean, music is just such a nuanced art form, of all these different sounds and all of these different things. And it's sort of like, um, yeah, I think like understanding like the function of it, that, you know, sound is so important, and it's God. It's like the first thing, it's primal to us. And I mean, even when we're, um, I mean, you need your sense of sound to survive. I mean, if you're out in the woods and there's like something tracking you, like, you know, something's coming up behind you because you can hear it. And then like you need to be able to hear those things. You can hear where the food is. You can, you know, and so being able to listen to music and understanding music and the nuances of the messages help you to stay alive. But I think, yeah, I think I got off a little bit on a tangent.
Yeah, so like socially, why is music important? Why is it still current to us now? Why does why do recorded examples of music matter, or why does live music
Hmm.
matter?
Yeah, I think music is, and I think it's the central point of any education system as well, is to really focus on the fact that music is a communal activity.
There we go.
Music is
Yeah.
a social activity.
Mm.
It's always been. I mean, sure, we have our own like individual music for ourselves, but we record it or we rehearse it and we practice it so that way, even if it is just me on my solo instrument, I'm performing it to everybody else.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's why people like, that's why we're so attracted to joining a music group, and making music with them. That's why we like to go to church and sing, and that's part of the reason why people like to go to church, is just for the singing, because it's just nice to make music together and to make these sounds, and to make sounds that sound good, because there's just something very human about when you hear a good sound. It just makes you really happy, and there's just something that a good sound just hits the human soul in a way, and there's no way to really describe it. It's just when you hit a good sound, like, you feel good.
I mean, it hits a number of your bodies. It hits your physical body because your eardrums react to it. You have pressure waves that are changing the atmosphere around you. Your body is physically experiencing it. It hits your mental body. It changes your brain chemistry.
Yeah.
Like you definitely experience like a change of chemistry in your body when you're listening to music that you appreciate. And then you could also say that it hits you spiritually. You know, it's like it hits your emotions, and through your emotions, it activates your spirit. Um, like it's oh, I'm losing it. Where was I? It's um, it is a community thing. I guess like that. There it is. So like, okay, so we're kind of being stripped of community right now. Like live music has like disappeared. We're trying to supplement it through like recorded music and these platforms where I have a camera in front of me and I'm
Hmm.
just like, hey everybody, you know, it's like so like what do you think is going to happen to like how is music going to compensate for this period of time where we're completely isolated? Um,
Yeah, this is a weird time. It's a really, really strange time. I mean, like, I have no idea what's going to happen to us. I mean, it's like we really have to reinvent ourselves. And I mean, we'll figure out something. I mean, music has always been very adaptable. We're always, I think that, like, in terms of all the other arts, we're always the last to come around. So, you know, I mean, historically, we've always been the last to come around, but like, who knows? Maybe it's our time to be the first. Who knows? Maybe, who knows? But like, yeah, I mean, it does take away the communal aspect, but it's just sort of like, again, like, how are we consuming and how are we encountering music? Maybe this just means that we encounter it differently.
right.
And, you know, like, I think I've been noticing a lot of things. I noticed, like, just recently, Spotify just released a new feature of having like listening function parties. So like just like on Netflix, where you can like do the, like you log into the same thing, and no matter where you are, like you're all watching at the same time at the same thing at the same time. Netflix, just one account, or Spotify, one account, like is playing something and everybody logs in and you can listen to it together.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
like, and that's something like having a lot of listening parties, or like one of the things that I'm starting with my site with Plato's Notebook is like having listening events of, you know, me just putting up, like, I think it's a good time for, I think for now, what's a really valuable activity for musicians and those of us who are mindful of this while we're in this time is this is a great opportunity to teach people how to actually listen to music again, and to really like how to encounter new types of music, and to introduce in a very non-threatening way to the non-musician how a musician listens and how a musician hears music.
Mm.
Um, and that, you know, contrary to what they might think, that we're just like, it's a bunch of math and music theory and we're just like all this like technical stuff in our head, which yeah, that's kind of there, but it's not as prevalent as they think it is. And I
Right.
think like being able to communicate that, and like I think that's one way that as artists and as musicians and composers, that's a great way of how we can increase our audience and really grow our audience, is to teach them how to listen to us.
Hmm.
And how to listen to the things that we listen to, and how to hear what we hear. But yeah, like I think like having listening parties, of having like things where people are listening together. I love those events. Like we have them on campus all the time, or when we had campus gatherings, you know, where we'd have like an album of the week and people would come together and just like listen to like a full album. And then talk about it. But I think also like I love those types of formats, sort of like book clubs. But I also like, you know, just giving people a playlist and say, all right, like listen to this, and next week we'll meet by this point and let's talk about what you heard.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, that's something that we've been talking about integrating into our music school here, is like trying to like expose people to music more often, and in a way where it's a communal witnessing program. Because that's what I think is really important about live music, is like we go to this show and then we all get to experience this one moment together, the presence, the now together. And it's like at that point, it's like another thread that is connecting everybody in the room.
Right.
And so like we can kind of simulate that with recorded music if we gather and witness it simultaneously,
Mm-hmm.
even if that's in a virtual platform. We're starting to get to this other camp here where we're talking about like why music is important to like the composers and to the musicians. But like before we get all the way there, I think there's this middle question that I want to talk about, like where like you talked about how like a good sound affects the body and you can like witness the change. Um, how much of music is subjective? Like at the point that like taste is a thing, and I might hear something that agitates me, but you might thoroughly enjoy it. Like, I mean, I think The Rite of Spring is a perfect example because that caused such a huge uproar when it was debuted. But like, what is this about music that makes it subjective to where some people can witness something and think it's atrocious or love it?
Yeah, yeah. Or it's like Steve Reich, and like the very first time I heard "Come Out to Show Them," like I was in music history class, and it was just like my world just blew open. I was like, oh my God. And I was the only person in the room. No, there was one other person in the room. We both kind of made eye contact. We're like, oh my God, this is cool. And everybody else was like, please stop. This is awful. And like the
Right.
professor played the entire 12 minutes.
Wow.
And like, but it's just like, yeah, I mean, how are we engaging it? I think like it's, I think a lot of it is, I mean, sure, it absolutely is very subjective. I mean, music is a form of communication, and in some aspect, there is a universal form of communication. I mean, we can listen to music of people from 1,000 years ago that spoke a totally different language, and we can completely understand. We completely can relate to it. But like, yeah, like we do have some cultural programming and historical programming into how we're supposed to um, accept and hear things. And I think um, you know, like even like a very classic like Bach cantata to a Western audience even though the music has been around forever now and everybody's been exposed to it. Um, when I lived in Korea when I taught in Korea for a couple of years, I noticed that even like the big standard, classic standard from like Bach and Mozart and stuff, the Koreans, even though they were big music lovers and went to music school and everything, that they encountered Bach differently, that they had a different feeling towards him and that they interpreted it differently. And that, certain chord progressions I would hear, like there's certain types of conventions that were very popular in Baroque music that Korean ensemble would just totally plow over and just totally didn't even catch. But it's like a total cultural thing. Like, for us, it's so intrinsically programmed. We've heard that chord progression over and over again, and everything is like, it comes up in so much of our music that we just begin to associate those things.
Mm-hmm.
And we culturally assign meanings to them. And that's part of the fun of rediscovering old music, is going back and like listening to those conventions and understand and relating to them with the conventions that we traditionally have always understood them, but then identifying those and then trying to reassign different values to them, try to see those conventions in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's something that an untrained musician or an untrained listener wouldn't be able to. But I think like somebody who is who is trained could really yeah, lost my thought there.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. This is
but
good. Um, okay.
but yeah, I think
Uh,
music is very much like, I think how we listen to music is very it's culturally programmed, and how like we sort of like come to understand it. But I think that, yeah, I'll just stop there.
no, you're solid. Yeah, that was a great answer. So like let's shift. Like why is music important to you? What does music do for you as like as somebody who like writes music and expresses themselves through music? What are the some of the ways that it like fuels you or like refills the energy that you put into it?
um yeah, I can't do anything else. I think is really like, when it comes down to it, it's just like music. That is me. That's what I do. I make music, and like that, I've always made music. My
Mm-hmm.
mom said when I was a little baby, like I would sing all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and like they were actually like tunes, and like I have always been making music and always been playing around with sound, and I can't do anything else. I mean, even when I try to do something else, I'm doing music in some way. I'm listening to it, I'm creating it, I'm like listening to sounds. I mean, like I had this one job where it's a horrible, boring office job, like just soul killing. And the copy machine, like I was like, my desk was kind of close to the copy machine. And it was like one of those big copy machines. And I lived for when somebody had to do a giant copy work, like, and like there's one teacher that she would have to like copy like these big things, and it would probably be a good 25-30 minute print job. And that machine gave the coolest rhythm, and it was like a boom, and it's just the machine working. And I would like, yeah, when I would see her coming with her big stack of books, yes, yes, yes. And I would just sit there, and like I would even have like little melodies like practice in my head, like on the train ride home and stuff, just waiting for the next time somebody would be like copying music, so that way I could like sit here and like play around with this thing, and I'd like hum around to myself. And sometimes my coworkers would be like, Eugene, stop. And I'm like, sorry. But or like I'd be humming along a bass line, and like some of my coworkers knew what was going on. They're like, Eugene, what are you doing? And so like sometimes like I go stand over there as a boom 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 and stuff. It's like I can't help but make music. I can't help but hear a copy machine and think, that's a cool beat, let me sing something over that. Or here comes the train, like at the subway station's coming, like, oh wow, the way the announcer just said that last word combined with the tracks, like with the wheels hitting the track and coming into the tunnel at just that moment, that was a really cool moment. Like, and just sort of like replaying that, like, oh, that was a really cool rhythm. Or like, oh, did you hear like like this sound here, or like listening to like some like saxophone player on the street corner, and like just like listening to him just play his own thing and lost in his own world while the bus is driving by, and just like the rhythm from the wheels. There's just like how those two, like, I mean, I can't relate to the world any other way. Like,
I think that that's like it's really interesting. Like at the point that you talk about like you witnessing two different sound events as like one phenomenon,
yeah,
um, and that's like a there again. It's a very presence oriented experience in the sense that it's just two like seemingly untethered phenomenon happening at the same time, and it like it because of the relationship to one another it sounds like music. I mean I think that there is like you can kind of get into music that is drone oriented where it's just like one thing happening, but more often than not even within drone music there's usually another thing that happens that gives a point of reference between the two. It's rarely a dot. I mean, it's usually multiple lines happening at the same time. And like we get to witness those multiple lines happening and kind of put it together, or and multiple events happening and put it together inside of our brains. Like we get to like put the pieces together and witness it. And that's like it's a layer of magic
yeah,
that like humans get to have.
yeah.
Um,
It's total magic. It's total magic. I mean, magic is just using energy with an intention. So it's just like, I mean, like that's magic in a nutshell. Like any magic is just using energy with an intention, with a specific intention. I mean, and music is pure energy.
mhm. Yeah,
But yeah,
cool. Um, what is pop music? What is like what is the like I think that we've touched on it a little bit, but I want to hear you kind of define a little bit more about like the agenda behind pop music.
that's a really cool question. So it's funny, like when I first started hearing the term pop music was when I was a kid. And pop music was sort of, now I wasn't really, I could listen to the radio, but like, I mean, I was in a very religious house. My dad was a preacher, and like the church that we grew up in was very, very religious. So like I never got to see MTV. I got to sneak glimpses of MTV every now and then. Like I couldn't listen to the radio a lot of times. I remember having my radio and stuff taken away from me when I was listening to the Humpty Dance
Yeah.
when that came on, right? With Digital Underground, or like anything Digital Underground did, like, or any of that stuff. Like or Madonna was just absolutely no. Like I remember like anytime Madonna would come on the radio, and my mom would just be like slut and turn the radio off, and it's just like, okay, like, I mean, so for me, like that was pop music though, and like that's what was specifically called pop music. And so for a long time, probably up until I was maybe in college. I mean, I don't think I was like really as committed to the definition by that point, but I don't think that I'd really consciously made a shift in what I understood, what I identified pop music to be. But I identified pop music as the music that I would get in trouble for listening to, that was on the radio, and it was called pop because the beat was poppy, and it made pop sounds, the boom, boom, and so that was pop music because it used pops for its sound. And and so I thought that pop music was only a phenomenon that happened in the 80s and 90s, and that there wasn't anything such as that, there wasn't pop music before then. It was just an 80s and 90s thing. It was a my generation thing. Of
Right,
course,
right.
I mean, I was a really stupid kid. I will definitely admit that. There are a bunch of things where it's like, oh my gosh, like it's, yeah. But I think as I got older, like I realized, oh, pop music is just short for popular music. And then when I was in college, one of my professors actually like said that. She was like, because it was in music theory, it was first year music theory, and we were doing chord progressions, and we were analyzing songs and stuff, and everybody was analyzing Bach chorales and stuff. But our professor, she brought in Beatles songs. We were looking at Let It Be, and like Yesterday, and when we were analyzing the chord progressions for that, which is perfect, which is
That's
exactly
cool.
that's how you should be learning chord theory, because that's what's relevant to us as musicians. Bach is amazing as a professional recorder player, and as somebody who has played like early music for over 28 years, and I have like done tons of stuff. Like I've played with the early music ensembles in Yale. Like I've done a ton of research. Like I've done a lot of legit stuff in the early music community. Bach is irrelevant and useless. Like I love Bach, it's amazing, but it's irrelevant and useless to us today. I mean, like if we really want to learn 4-part harmony, unless you're wanting to teach early music, who cares about Bach anymore? Who cares about Beethoven? Who cares about Mozart? Um, but yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
off on a
Pop,
tangent.
yeah,
Bring me back. Bring me
the
back.
whole pop music phenomenon. Because I feel like what's happening with pop music is like I think that like we've definitely had pop, like at one point Mozart was popular, right?
Yeah,
It was certainly popular music at a certain point, and then like you fast forward to like the 1920s, and like swing music, jazz was
that was
popular
cool.
music.
Yeah,
Yep, and then like we move into like the 60s and 70s, and there's like rock and roll and R&B that popular music, and like it's like there's definitely always been popular music, but like I think that it's shifted pretty drastically within. I think that the agenda behind popular music has shifted as like profits have like become
yeah.
more of a focus.
I think that's, and like for sure profits. Like that's definitely something to hone in on. I think like for pop music, I think, are you asking about American pop music or like pop music in general? Because I think like for me, like I would say American pop music, especially like contemporary American pop music, is very much its own distinct thing from like the general pop music. And I think like contemporary American pop music is primarily centered around money. And I mean, business, capitalism in general has always been music's best friend, and music and capitalism came up together in the same time. And like the printing press and the publishing industry is what really propelled music in its whole development, from like the 1400s. I mean, just like being able to, like when we started like writing books down and writing music and started selling printed music and hand copied music, and then the printing press came along and just like that was it. And like I mean, the Renaissance and Baroque period, I mean, music was the publishing industry, and it was all centered around what would sell and what is acceptable enough to the masses that would make them want to buy it. And that's really sort of, and that concept has really, like I mean, that's a very distinct European, very actually English concept that really just took off across the continent, relatively quickly, with all the English lute songs and everything that was really starting to become really popular during the late 16th century. But like into America, the radio is what pushed it a lot, and like that's what created our American contemporary pop music. It's just is whatever is the best to being mass consumed. And I mean, that's essentially, I mean, that is what Billboard is all about. It's about who was able to like hit this mark this week, who was able to make something that universally most people wanted to buy, for this week. And it's just, who cares if it's good? Who cares what it's about? Who cares about quality or anything? It's just, can we get this to sell? What can we get people to sell? And I feel like a lot of times today, a lot of music is sort of, what can we trick people into buy? Because like there's a lot of it is just sort of like you're sort of promised. Like I mean, we don't sell albums anymore. I mean, albums have kind of like gone up. They'll come back for sure. Probably like that's probably one great aspect of COVID is that now that we have more time, and like as we as musicians start to train our listeners and our fans to like how to listen, perhaps we can focus more on bigger collective works. But not that there's anything wrong with not listening to albums and only listening to short songs and stuff. I mean, that's perfectly great too. But like yeah, I think pop music, especially American pop music in general, is whatever can be consumed by the
Mhm.
most people, at one period of time. And I think that's really all that it really worries about. I mean, that's why music when you talk about like, especially like pop music, you hardly ever actually talk about music. You know, you're not talking about instruments, you're not talking about chord progressions, you're not talking about voice leading or like tone colors or stuff. You're talking about what the particular performer was wearing, or what they're like, the words that they're talking about. You're talking about their poetry more than you are about their music. Or you're talking about their social stance more than you are about what the music actually is.
Mm.
I mean, yeah, like, yeah. And I think like you get like these really like, that's sort of how we judge what an amazing artist, an amazing pop artist is today, is that when they can combine um, important, pertinent social issues into music. And when, you know, we're still, I mean, when you talk about people like Nina Simone, hardly ever I've have yet actually to engage in a conversation, even with like professional singers and professors that are in this whole field. Never have I ever had a conversation with people about her vocal techniques, or like the chord progressions, or like her piano playing, or like the particular like musical interpretations, like those nuanced things of what she's doing to like help accentuate some of the message of the words that she's doing. Never had a conversation with that, even though I've talked with some pretty high-end music professors. Never actually had those conversations actually come up. When Nina Simone comes up, we talk about her social stance, we talk about her life, we talk about other things, which is very important and it's very interesting. But to me, I always feel like, yeah, but we're not really talking about music.
Right,
You
right.
know.
Yeah.
But I think, and like, that's kind of pop music. I think when I think popular music is where society, social norms, like wherever we are as a culture and socially, sort of the music is just there to exist as a backdrop, as a background, or maybe a soundtrack for us to discuss these other cultural ideas. But
Mm.
yeah, I think pop music has more to do with social ideas than it does with music.
Mm.
Um, but I mean, it's just whatever's popular, whatever gets us to talk about what we need to talk about, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. Cool. Um, I want to pivot, and I want to hear you. I'd like to hear you talk about like your like the music that you've been creating. Like if you were to describe like the style of music that you find yourself like creating, how would you articulate that?
Yeah. So, like I said, like I've been really getting into sound art, and just really working with like my relationship with sound. And for me, like I had this big breakthrough a couple weeks ago where I was working with sampling and stuff, and you know, I'm sampling bird sounds and like hummingbird wings and like woodpeckers and stuff. And you know, rivers or thunderstorms or anything, like the fan sitting in the window, the dishwasher. I recorded the dishwasher the other day. It was really cool. It has a great rhythm. And any sound, like this concept came to me that any sound can be sampled, and any sample can be turned into an incomplete instrument, you know, through MIDI. And so every sound that I hear is its own instrument. Like every sound potentially is its own instrument. And then every combination of sounds together is its own instrument. And repeating the same sound, or saying like having the same instrument make the same sound over and over again, is really just creating a choir of itself. And, you know, just really everything around me is an instrument. Everything around me is a potential symphony. And
Mhm.
so for me, like that just sort of, it very much blew open the door, because I went through a long time where I just wasn't writing. I mean, I had a lot of personal stuff and a lot of stuff going on where I was listening to music, and I would occasionally pick up my instrument and practice, but you know, wasn't really writing or wasn't really doing much. And you know, encountering sound and beginning to develop a relationship with just listening and with just sounds, and like how that's music and how it can be used as music, really just sort of just completely almost remade me as a musician.
Mm.
And the music that I do now, I call it eco music. Although I'm doing other stuff, but I primarily am using sounds, nature sounds. And part of it is sort of political. It is definitely, I'm definitely an environmentalist, and definitely, really feel like we need to preserve nature. Although I kind of have hit this point where I feel like we've kind of lost the battle with environmentalism. I mean, I know that we still say we have a little bit of time if we change, but we're not going to change. We're not going to make those changes. And our environment, our climate is done. Like we have lost. And I mean, I know that's kind of defeatist, but it's realistic. And I feel like instead of, for me as a eco musician, I feel like instead of throwing my energy behind a lost cause of trying to get people to change their ways and raise awareness, and hopefully we can affect something. I've just sort of taken the focus of, well, we have a unique time right now before it all goes away, that it's still here and it needs to be documented. And we have pictures, we have videos, but we really don't have sound. And listening to the forest is so calming, and it's really important for us as humans to be able to just listen to a forest for an hour and nothing else, or to just listen to a river. And I mean, like these, like the nature CDs and like all these different things that you can get on like iTunes and everything's, tons of them are free off YouTube and everything, where it's just an hour or sometimes 10 hours of a river or like forest or like the wind blowing across the desert. And like those are so important. And I just really feel like preserving those things, like first off, those need to be documented and preserved for future generations, because once it's gone, we'll never be able to know what it sounded like. And like that's so important. But also like how how can I incorporate them into my music? Like, do they have pitches? Can I make them into pitches? Can I put them in my sampler? And, can I play, like I was experimenting where I took like 4 different voice songbirds, and plugged them as their own instrument, and then just was playing around and just took an old Bach fugue and just
Wow.
use just the
Yeah, yeah.
tweets, just like and I mean, if you're not really paying attention, it just sounds like a bunch of birds, and it's a kind of annoying. But if you really hone in and you really kind of listen to it, you kind of start to hear the little pitch differentiations between them. I mean, it's not very clear, but I mean, if you're listening really closely, you can hear like the little thing in it. But just like like what can I do with nature, and how can I feel like, I mean, for me, like I'm very much an introvert, and I always feel very recharged to be in the forest and to be out in nature in any setting, but especially the forest. And so for me, I mean, it's like whatever the woodpecker is hammering out onto the tree. Like recently, I've had a lot of like pieces where that was like the seed harmony or the seed rhythm that I started off with. And, I'd hear some of the birds like start chirping off, and just there's an osprey nest that's just across the way from me. And so like that he like is out singing every morning, and just like he does like this particular triad where he like just like outlines the whole it's a perfect major triad. And it's just like, this is so cool. Like that's the osprey song. And just and I'll wake up to hearing that, and I'll kind of hum along with them, and then start off from there and hum something that
Yeah.
and that's kind of where I start off with. But for me, like that's kind of where I've been musically. But just really, how can I combine all the stuff around me? And I've been really, really heavily into recorder again as well. And so just like really exploiting like the recorder. I've got my whole group of recorders. So like, I've got like a really nice, pretty big range. I mean, I can do 5 octaves and
Yeah.
all of my instruments and stuff. And, that's just on that. That's before I even process it or, do something with that. But like, yeah, just really, yeah, that's where I've been musically.
Fantastic.
Really
Yeah.
like how I can integrate the sound of nature around me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear some recordings when you're ready to share.
Yeah,
Um,
too.
it's Uh, okay, cool. Like I kind of want to start moving out. Any profound advice that came to you as a musician, like like, was there any like set of words that came to you from mentors that has stuck through your experience as being a creator?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, listen. Like
Yeah.
just really just get the ear like in shape, and just really learn how to just listen to things. Um, I mean, I remember in college, I remember like constantly being yelled at for not listening and my voice lessons and stuff, and just like, you're not listening to yourself, like listen to yourself. And really like listening to yourself, not just like, is this note here, is this note fine, or just like overall, like everything what you're doing, to just really be in tune. Um, yeah. Um, I think also, and I can say from personal experience from actually having gone through this, like, don't stop making music. If you feel called to making music, if you feel you know, if you're a musician, you'll always know, you've always known. And I think like for all of us, like we've always known. It's just never been a like, oh, I was 25 and suddenly I thought maybe this would be fun. It's like, no, you've always had a calling to music, and it's stay faithful to that. And you know, even when you don't want to do your craft, do your craft. Like even when you don't want to practice, practice. And that practice doesn't mean like just doing like some arbitrary scales and some horrible like torturous exercise and then play this song that you're going to be playing at some solo. Practice is like your instrument. The way you make music is an extension of yourself, and you practice your music like you practice yoga, or like you practice your religion or your spirituality. Like you are a musician, like you're practicing being. Like I mean, for me, like I practice being a recorder player and playing my recorder, and just whatever that means for that day, for whatever it is that I need to do. And I mean, it changes for whatever my needs are. But, you know, some days I just need to turn on a drone and improvise for an hour or two or four or five. I mean, I like lately I've been practicing, like I probably play like 3 or 4 hours a day.
Mm.
Um, and you know, it's practice your scales.
Yeah.
Even though they suck and they're awful and like everybody hates them and they're like mind numbing and the least creative thing you could do, practice your damn scales and learn every single scale that you possibly can, and find every book of scales and like all the exotic scales and the hundreds of thousands of different scales that there are. Learn them, memorize them, practice them, learn every single mode of them, go up and down, and every arpeggio and every single possibility with them, as boring and as awful as it is, because when you're improvising, you can't think about those things. You've just got to you just have to be those things. And if you haven't practiced and internalized those things, you can't do it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
Like do the hard stuff. Like do the monotonous, awful, boring stuff. Do them anyway, and this like make it as part of a spiritual exercise, or just light some incense, turn on a drone, and just turn off the lights and close your eyes and do all of your scales for half an hour, up and down, backwards, forwards, every mode, everything you can, and just do it. Turn your
Yeah.
mind off and meditate through them. But
Cool. Yeah, that's great. Eugene, this has been really lovely. I've really enjoyed the conversation. There's been some really neat facets that we've been able to touch on, and your insight is priceless.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, thanks for asking. This is fun. It's really nice. I love this. I
Oh,
love
right
talking
on.
like this.
Yeah, likewise, man. It's a real treat to share it with you. My last question for you is there anybody that you would recommend that I would interview to have the same style of conversation with?
Yeah, you could totally. I know for sure my advisor would probably love to talk to you. Actually, I would love for you and her to meet. I would love to see what you guys work together. She's an incredible pianist. She's if you're familiar with Pauline Olivaros, Pauline, you should definitely check out Pauline Olivaros. She developed the whole technique called deep listening, And she's a West Coast, or was a West Coast composer. She died a couple years ago. But my advisor was one of her top students, Dana Reason, and she teaches at OSU. I'll send a communication.
Yeah, I'd really appreciate that.
But she's totally into like sound art and improvisation. So she's got her PhD in improvisational studies
Cool.
from UCSD. And like she is incredible. She does a lot of jazz piano and stuff. Like I'll send you. You're on Spotify, yeah? You have Spotify?
No, actually, I don't. Uh,
I didn't use Spotify for a long time, and I just kind of one of the classes that I took required that we have a Spotify account, and so I just got it, and I'm like, well, ethically, I hate this company and I hate everything that they do, and I really feel like it's awful for like a lot of like for musicians like myself. It's horrible for me, but the amount of music that I have access to that I've never had access to before is incredible.
right.
It's definitely, yeah. But she's got a lot of her stuff up on there. She's got her stuff up on iTunes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd definitely buy some.
yeah. She's great. She's often performing in Well, when we can perform, like she's doing a lot of performances up in Portland.
Okay, cool.
And she's doing a lot of stuff. You probably know. Oh, I think you actually know him, Mike Gamble.
I do know that name. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're on Facebook. I think I was looking, and I think I saw that you guys were mutual friends on Facebook. He's also a student of. He graduated a couple years before me at Oregon State, but he's also really close with Dr. Reason, with Dana Reason. But he's in Portland. He's a guitar player. Super good. He's really, really good. Does a lot of really cool. A lot of stuff that I know him. Most of the stuff I've seen him do is like avant-garde, experimental stuff. But like I've heard him do some jazz stuff. He's good. He's really good. He does a lot of electronic stuff. You two should definitely. I'd love to see what you two came together. If you guys ever like jammed together.
Yeah, that would be cool. Right on. Great. Yeah, I've got those names down. Deep listening. I'm gonna check some of that out as well.
Yeah, Pauline Olivaros, like her stuff is just like totally crazy. She lived in Port Townsend, Washington, and she had
Interesting.
access to like this big cistern, underground like cistern cave. And one day she just climbed down with her recording equipment and sat in this cave and started making sounds and recorded. And that's where her whole concept of like deep listening and like sound art and all that stuff like started coming. And like deep listening was kind of a pun because she was like deep underground listening, but it was also like, but she's done tons of work on like listening as a spiritual meditative exercise, and that like part of a musician, like an essential part of being a musician is also your ritual of being a musician, and how you ritualize your music, and your practice. But just really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I'm really excited to check.
Totally up your alley.
Thank you for the references. Yeah, this is fantastic. Wonderful, Eugene. Thank you again for sharing your time with me and your mindset.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, have a wonderful evening, and we should stay in touch. Yeah, I'll
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, when it's safe, you should definitely come down and visit. We should make some music.
I would really enjoy that. Yeah, for sure.
Birds.
Lovely. Right on. Take care, Eugene.
All right, you too.
Good night.